Good morning, viewers. Thank you very much for tuning into this special episode of Fincademy Ventures. I'm Aditya Kondawa, the co-founder of Fincademy, and we have a very special person with us today who needs no introduction. Fondly called as the girl with a broken neck, we have with us today Mrs. Radhika Gupta. She's the MD and CEO of Edelweiss Asset Management. But much more than that, she's a person who has never given up in life. She has battled a lot of odds, and she has come out stronger in the midst of all that. So without much more ado, we will start this event. Good morning, Radhika ma'am. I welcome you to this Fincademy's event. How are you doing?
Thank you so much, and a pleasure to connect to you and your audience digitally. I keep seeing the good work you're doing on social media, so I'm glad we got this opportunity.
Thank you very much, ma'am. So Radhika ma'am, tell us something about your childhood and schooling. I believe you were born in Pakistan and your father was a diplomat. So did you have to shift a lot of schools and how was this experience like?
So it was a pretty cool childhood. It was a cool childhood, but it was also a chaotic childhood. Yeah, my father was a diplomat, and he shifted countries every 3 years. Now, the interesting thing about the government when you shift countries is that you shift between very drastic countries because the government is very democratic. So they label each city or posting in the world from A through C, and like C is the bad countries, and C star is like the non-family stations, like the scary places, and A star is like the best in the world. So the idea is basically if you've gone to an A star country or an A country, then the next thing you'll get is a C country. So you shift sometimes from, like we shifted from Pakistan in the 80s, there was nothing to do in Pakistan, to New York, which is a phenomenal place. And I mean, remember in the early 90s, living in New York was wonderful because, when you came back to India, there was actually not very much. This was pre-liberalization. In fact, I remember us carrying Tang packets back for our family in India. I mean, now anybody who goes to the US will not carry anything back because you get everything available at your local bania. But this was that time. And then from New York, again, he shifted to Nigeria, which at that time was so behind that there was no milk. You could only get milk powder to make milk. So it was a very drastic shift in environment and also school system and also language. So, in that sense, it's a very chaotic childhood, but it's also a very blessed childhood. I mean, whenever I have children, and I don't right now, I wish they had that kind of childhood, although they won't. Because it's very different to move countries and live in countries rather than just visiting them as a visitor. When you visit, I mean, firstly, you're never going to go to Nigeria on vacation. Secondly, visiting something, I mean, I hope you don't, okay? It's not that much to do. But visiting Italy versus spending 3 years in Italy, it's a completely different thing. So I'm actually very grateful for the childhood.
Awesome. So I think this would be a first-hand experience of working in the stock market because, like you said, you were in an A-star country, then you went to a C country. So the ups and downs of life were similar to the stock market. So tell us something. How many countries did you travel to, and how many different countries did you study in?
I think I studied in 5 or 6 countries, 4 continents, okay. Many different school systems. So I remember rotating. So in Pakistan, I didn't go to school because it is too unsafe for kids of Indian diplomats to go to school in Pakistan. So I didn't go to school till the age of 5. So I didn't do the pre-KG and all that stuff that happens today. I was homeschooled. Then I've done an American school. Then I've done an Indian school. So I went to, if anyone is watching from Delhi, I went to Delhi Public School, Vasant Vihar, which was really damn tough after an American system because it's a very intense school. And then I've done American systems, European systems. So, and all these school systems also have different times of the year. So some start in September, some start in July. So there was a lot of that going on. As far as travel, my God, I don't know how many countries I've traveled to. Because when we lived in Italy, we basically saw all of Europe. When we lived in West Africa, we saw all of West and North Africa. When we lived in Zambia, we saw all of that. So literally everywhere and anywhere. My head of sales keeps joking that I find a connection to every country on earth somehow.
I think everyone watching this jealous, having to travel so many countries and living there for years. So Radhika ma'am, our first jobs are very special for us, because that is the first paycheck that we get. It is our first step into the real world or the practical world. The dreamy land of the college ends and you have to actually face life. So why don't you tell us about your first job at McKinsey and the company? And then, we have heard a very interesting story of the bridge game. So can you tell us more about that as well?
Yeah, so I think that story has become a little bit of a legend. But I guess before I go there, I would tell you that this process of finding a first job, what we call placements in India, what we used to call on-campus recruiting in the US, I think it is one of the toughest processes for an individual to go through, especially if you're not a very confident individual. And I have to say, I was a very good student, but I was not the most confident individual. And I just believe that that process brings out the worst in people because it's unnecessarily competitive, and you actually think that the first job is the make or break of your life, when actually it isn't. I mean, by the way, most of my classmates left their first job in 1.5 years. So you have to sit and think why we were crying over this. But utna perspective life mein hota nahi hai at that point in time. So I did 2 internships at Microsoft. I'm a computer science and finance person by background, and then I decided I wanted to do consulting. Basically, consulting is a really funny thing. I mean, everybody wants to be a management consultant, right? You think, you're going to decide great strategy for corporations, etc., etc. Doesn't really happen when you're 23, 24. And there's all this case study stuff, like how many ping pong, like how, if you have to cover Mumbai, how many square inches of pizza would you need, etc., etc. So I was totally lost with all of this. It's well known that I got rejected 7 times. I also tried to jump off a building because I got rejected. But I did finally get my job at McKinsey. I'm very grateful to them. I got it less because of my great academic credentials and more because of a hobby I picked up in Nigeria, which is called playing bridge. I learned to play bridge in Nigeria because there's nothing else to do in that country. And I guess the reason that story has become popular is because nothing you do in life is useless, right? I wrote this on Twitter a few days ago that, what is a film dialogue that really means something to you? And for me, it is actually, and don't judge me, it's the Alchemist version in Hindi of the Shah Rukh Khan dialogue that agar kisi cheez ko sache dil se chaho, to genuinely puri kainat आपको उसे मिलाने की कोशिश में लग जाती है. And I think that the dots really connect in life. So what you did then turns out to be useful much later. You just don't know it's going to happen.
Definitely, I totally agree to that. The whole gist of the session was that, a lot of students were worried about placements, and like you said, they all thought that it was a make or break event of their lives. So what would be a tip or a piece of advice to them?
So my first piece of advice is, in placement season, I'm genuinely saying this from the bottom of my heart, stay away from all your friends and colleagues, because it genuinely brings out, and I have great friends who have, my college friends are my closest friends or not. But that process of placement, it kind of brings out the worst in people. And you feel very underconfident about yourself. Now, I had a lot of classmates who were convinced they knew everything about how to crack a consulting job. Actually, nobody knows anything, right? Nobody knows the reality. We've all read the same books. We've all read the same tips. We've all studied the same case studies, but don't let that negativity and competition get to you. That's one thing I would say. The second is, it is important to be ambitious and have your heart set on something. But remember that when you're getting rejected, and you will get, and placement season was my first sort of twist with rejection. I don't believe the Indian system prepares you for rejection. Do realize that the rejection is not personal. They're not rejecting you. They like someone else more than you. And sometimes, maybe they know a little, because I've also been on the other side when I am hiring people and I have gone back for placement seasons. Sometimes they find a candidate a better fit than you, and maybe you will be, so, your good placement season is like joining a chapter in someone's story. Maybe you'll find another book to be a part of, and they found a better character for their story. So don't take that rejection too personally. So these are my 2 pieces of advice. One, stay away from the noise and negativity and just kind of be in your own bubble, and genuinely don't take rejection that personally.
Okay, that's awesome. So ma'am, your next job was at an asset management firm, and this was early in Wall Street. So how was the experience?
So it was a phenomenal asset management firm, and I experienced, actually, as you said, both the bull and bear of Wall Street, because I joined in 2006, and 6 and 7 were like phenomenal years to be on Wall Street. I mean, it was just growth and chaos and frenzy, but it was growth. AQR is also a very academically driven place. It's founded by people who actually the founder is from Penn, my alma mater, but it's got a really academic culture. So there are two things they get really right. They're constantly getting professors from the University of Chicago to come talk. Like Nassim Taleb used to come talk to us, and we didn't realize that this was a big deal.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, so Taleb was coming and talking to us because he was friends with Cliff, and we were like, okay, Taleb, I mean, like, what's the big deal? So they had a constant learning culture, which was great. The other thing which I learned early, and I'm applying in my career here, is that AQR was very technology driven. I mean, they were a quant firm at the core, but everything was very, very digital and very technology driven. I mean, they were only hiring investment professionals who knew how to code. So think about how technology driven they were in terms of their investment process. So I think that was great. I also saw 2008 through AQR, which, I mean, anybody who has seen 2008 will have an interesting story to tell. But for me, because I saw it early in my career, it was my tryst with risk management. I mean, I have learned so much about risk management, etc., from 2008. I've also learned, one of the greatest things the head of sales at AQR said is that, in good times, you don't need to talk to your clients. But in bad times, please be out there. Please communicate. And I don't think any system teaches you the importance of communication, but AQR and David Kabiller, who was the head of sales, taught me the importance of communication. He said, in good times, your numbers will speak to you. In bad times, you need to be out there. And I've seen David doing that. So I think that was really interesting. And I think the last thing I would say is I also learned that careers in financial services are uncertain. Because in 2008, you saw a lot of colleagues losing jobs, not just at AQR, but across Wall Street. You saw the excesses of 2006 and 7 completely unraveling. So that was, I mean, to see friends of yours, if you ask most people their most telling memory of 2008, it is not the portfolio losses or the stock market or Lehman. It is seeing their colleagues and friends laid off and having packed their boxes and walk out of the door. So it taught me that finance is a very uncertain career. It's got a lot of roller coasters, and it taught me to be a lot more balanced personally.
Amazing. So one word that caught my attention was the word learning. So can you just tell us how learning will take you from point A to point D?
It's a beautiful question because I think, learning is not learning for the sake of marks. And, I get to interact with a lot of CEOs within my industry and outside. I think anyone who's good is constantly trying to pick up skills. It is even more relevant in India's capital market, where the capital market is evolving. So even if you have done a hard finance education here, यहाँ तो हर बार नए instruments आते जाते हैं. AIF regulations were new, REIT regulations were new. So you constantly need to be upskilling your finance education. Second thing, and new kind of passive instruments are coming in, debt ETFs are coming in. I'm sure we'll talk about that. The second thing is that as you get senior in your career, you also need to pick up a lot of non-finance skills, because as I've learned, running an asset management business is about 30% financial services. The rest is there's marketing, there's compliance, there's operations, there's P&L management, there's accounting. Who's going to learn this? And as a CEO, you're accountable for all of this. So I remember when I joined the mutual fund business 3-4 years ago, I came from an AIF and PMS background where you don't do sort of any sales and marketing. I mean, it's, your clients are high net worth individuals. So the first thing I jumped into was learning sales and marketing, because I didn't know the M of marketing, right? And I think by the way, I was terribly scared to speak on stage also. And I realized this profession actually requires you to do that. So I took some classes in how to do that. So I think constantly learning and upskilling yourself is not a choice you have.
That is great, yeah. So, you started working with McKinsey, then you went to AQI, and then suddenly in the year 2019, you left your job and you went on to register Forefront Capital Management. So could you just tell us, what happened and what led you to start this company and come back to India when you had such a good job and you were on Wall Street? So I'm pretty sure you must have gotten the question that, are you out of your mind a lot of times? I'm pretty sure. So could you just tell about the journey?
Look, every Indian parent who has got a middle class kid who's gone abroad, survived the layoffs on Wall Street, is going to be paranoid about why they want to come. So, and I don't blame them, right? If it was my kid, I would ask the same question. So they'll say things like, थोड़ा देर के बाद सोच लेना, or they'll say, come back to India when you are the MD of Goldman Sachs, come back with a great MNC job. I mean, you don't leave a large dollar salary in the US and come back to India to live in some like tiny apartment where you cannot afford a car and you have no income. And Bombay is a pretty expensive city to live in. And also, if you start a PMS business in this country, you have to put 2 crores as net worth, which when you're 24, we put 1/3 each because we were 3 partners, is a large amount of money. I mean, I remember having a few lakhs left in the bank account after that net worth was parked into the company. But I think, you don't plan so much at 24. There was a desire to come back and start a business. There was a desire to do more than one was already doing. And I always joke that because my father has moved around every 3 years, I get a little bored every 3 years. I want some change in life. So maybe it was a function of that. But I always say young blood is hungry, foolish, energetic, and you don't overthink. The only thing we did think is, look, plan B was that if this didn't work, please go back for an MBA. So it is important in some sense to be practical and have a plan B. So it was a calculated risk.
Awesome. So, ma'am, since the advent of startups and the advent of a lot of billion-dollar or unicorn startups in India, a lot of young people have been, choosing startups as an option. So, what is something that you would like to tell them?
I think you have to choose a startup. If you are going down the startup journey, don't do it because it's glamorous. It's the same thing I tell to people who want careers in finance, because the glamour dies out pretty soon. What you read in the papers is the unicorns and the headlines. What you don't see is the tough struggle with VCs, the difficulty in raising capital, the trickiness in living without a salary and stable income, the pressure that you get from your family, the number of startups that fail. So do it once if you're totally convinced and know what the journey is like, and do it when you have a clear idea that you love. I mean, don't just say, I'm looking for a startup, mujhe koi idea do, just because I can start. It doesn't work like that. You can't just say, I want to start a startup. Have something that drives you and be very convinced about the choices you're making, because if you're doing this, you'll have to give it time. Many people leave startups prematurely because they just run out of steam.
Wonderful. That's a great piece of advice to all the budding entrepreneurs out there. So, Matt, in 2014, you sold your firm to Edelweiss, and then you went on to become the CEO of Edelweiss AMC. So, our viewers would like to learn from all of your experiences, and, we have listened to your previous talks as well, wherein you talk about the importance of doing everything. You have went around for a notary as well. You even washed the dishes, and you have famously said that you're the founder of a startup. You have to do everything from client meetings to even washing the dishes. So, can you just tell us about the importance of being an all-rounder in a startup?
I think it's important to be an all-rounder, not just in a startup, but even as you take on an executive role. I mean, obviously you're not running around with notaries. But, the point I was trying to make is, so when I moved back, like many of us, when you work in the corporate world, you have a very functional role. So my functional role was, I was a money manager. You don't realize that there is a much larger ecosystem of many functions that supports that functional role, and they play a very, very important part. Now, when you run a startup, you actually take on all those roles. So I remember when we started Forefront, my partners were like, okay, someone has to manage money, but clearly someone needs to deal with SEBI, clearly someone needs to deal with PR, someone needs to do all of this, and I was chosen as the person to do all of that, right? So I did all of that, and I think it was super valuable even in my CEO stint today, because I have now 15 direct reports, or 12 or 15 direct reports, and they must span 7-8 departments. I think one of the reasons I'm very comfortable dealing with compliance is because I also wrote our application to SEBI for PMS registration. I'm very comfortable with SEBI regulations. I've done a lot of marketing hands-on. So, and even when I joined the AMC business, there were a lot of departments I didn't know anything about. So I would just sit in the meetings and ask questions and ask questions and ask questions. But I really believe a CEO's role is no longer in the corner office. It is in the battlefield, not in the boardroom. You have to be hands-on in different departments that you're running if you want to drive something.
Understood. So, ma'am, you went from an employee to an auto leader. So, can you just tell us more about this journey, and can you give out some tips on people who want to lead an organization or lead a team of people? Like, what have been your learnings?
So, one is, I get this question a lot, entrepreneur to employee. I think entrepreneurship is a state of mind. It's not a state of employment. I feel as much, I'm as committed today as a CEO, as a professional CEO, as I work as an entrepreneur. I mean, my job is not a 9 to 5 job. I'll still work on Saturdays if I need to. I love the business I'm running. So I think ownership is a state of mind, and I think you should remember that. So you can and you should behave like an owner, even in a professional setup. I think leadership is something that you just learn by doing. My God, no school can prepare you for leadership. And I really believe I am still learning it. I think and everybody has their own leadership style. I think the most important thing I say about leadership is bring your genuine self to the table. Don't try and pretend like a leader. So one of my bosses gave me this advice. He's like, when you become a leader, you have this tremendous desire कि मैं meeting में जाके I'm going to add lots of value to people. So I'm going to go to the technology department and try and add value and tell him तुम ऐसा करो और तुम ऐसा करो. I said, don't do that. तुम्हें actually कुछ नहीं पता. Sit in the meetings and sit quietly, at least for 6 months, and just listen. Then start asking questions and then start building.
Sorry, ma'am, your voice got cut for the last 2 seconds.
It doesn't make you inferior. I was interviewing Dr. A. Velumani, and one of the things he says is, I asked him who inspired him, and he said, my employees. And he said, why do you need to look towards Buffett and Steve Jobs for inspiration? Look towards your employees for inspiration. We're all playing roles in an organization.
Awesome. So, Government of India chose Edelweiss to manage its first ever corporate bond ETF. And I mean, being in the financial markets, we all thought that, one of the bigger 4-5 players would get it. So you pulled it out from under the big guys, and which was a big fit in itself. And it was a big fit again because it was India's first corporate debt ETF. So we have 2 questions for you. So number one, how many meetings did you have to attend to get this opportunity to launch the first ever corporate debt ETF? And can you tell us a bit more about this journey?
God, I could do a whole webinar on this journey because I actually want to do a talk one day on the making of Bharat Bond because it's so special. The answer to your first question is simple. It's actually one meeting. I can tell you a little bit more about it. The way this works is they put out a mandate and you have to fill a form, and we kind of fill the form on a lark because I mean, like you, we also believe that the chances of us getting something like this is pretty slim, especially when you go through the form, because the form has your corporate background, then it has your distribution strength. Now, our distribution strength, especially at that point, compared to larger state-owned firms and compared to bank-owned asset managers, you can't compare. And then it has a product section where you talk about the product structure. We put our heart into the product, and then there is one meeting in Delhi. There were 4 or 5 other asset managers. We were actually, I think, the last presenter there, and we did the shortest presentation. I think our product structure worked for us. That's what I'm told. That could be the only thing that worked for us, because I remember doing the meeting and I was caught up in presenting, but my colleague Ranjit, who's our Insti head sitting there, he said, Radhika, I'm sure we've won it, right after the meeting. And I said, तो ऐसे ही कह रहा है यार, I mean, what nonsense. He said, I am sure. He said, मुझे देख के लग रहा है कि we have won it. And so that was, and we bid for it on a lark. And I think the lesson from this is that, life gives you moonshots. It gives you opportunities that can change your life. And maybe you have a 0.5% or 1% chance that the opportunity will come your way. But why don't you just try? Why don't you just sit on the table and try? Because the thing is, and I've seen Edelweiss Mutual Fund as a 36th ranked KMC. We are a 15th ranked KMC today. In your head, I always say you have to think like number one. Because if you think like 35 or 36, now you will not even be 35 or 36. You will slide to 40. But if you think like a champion, and you behave like a champion, at least in your head you can behave like a champion, right? The world may tell you you're not a champion, but in your head you can behave like a champion. So that's one of the things that's been very important. Bharat Bond took 12 months to bring to market. It was a grueling but very, very rewarding journey. We spent a lot of time on designing the product, and I do believe the success of Bharat Bond is because it was a product that people understood. It took the FD experience. I mean, Indian consumers are FD consumers. We want to know कि इतने साल में इतना मिलेगा जब हम बैंक में FD करने जाते हैं. And I think debt funds can be complicated. Nobody understands credit. Nobody understands duration. Nobody understands the movement up and down. So we tried to say that why can't we create an FD or bond-like experience with Bharat Bond? And we spent a lot of time looking at what is happening globally. But we said, ultimately, and I use Bollywood as a great proxy for this, our job is not to replicate what happens globally. I mean, Shah Rukh Khan says this, and again, my Shah Rukh Khan example, why should I make films for the crossover market? I have to make films for my domestic audience. And, our thinking was, why do we design something for the global market? We can take and learn from the best in the world, but we have to design something for our Indian investor base that is sitting in FDs and doesn't come into debt mutual funds. And I think that was the success of the program. Obviously, I think one of the new things with this one was we had to get approval from 18 ministries to launch this. So lots of trips to Delhi, probably 600-700 notes that were written. But I do remember December 4th, which just passed, which was the day the Union Cabinet approved it, was probably one of the most memorable days of my professional careers. I think to see a product that you've spent so much time on finally being launched by the finance minister in a press conference, I mean, it was unbelievable for a young AMC.
Amazing, man. It becomes clear, sends out a clear message that, for all the budding entrepreneurs out there, you have to create a product that will be adopted in a mass manner by the consumers, and it is a product that should be loved. It should solve a problem for them. Move on to the next question. But before that, I just want to ask you, throw some more light on the ETF. What kind of investors can invest in it, and what objective is met by investing in this ETF?
So I think Bharat Bond tries to meet the objective of the average debt investor in this country, which is safety, predictable returns, and I'm not saying returns, I'm saying predictable returns and liquidity. When we invest our money in debt, we want to make sure it is safe. And I think here the quality, given it is underlying PSU companies, is as safe as you can get. The second thing you want is predictability of returns. If I park money for X many years, I know that I'll get approximately this, चाहे interest rates कहीं जाए, ऊपर जाए, RBI ये करे, वो करे. So Bharat Bond was very unique in that it's got a target maturity structure. There's a 23 product, there's a 25 product, there's a 2030 product. So if you go to bharatbond.in today, which I encourage everyone listening to do, you can see all these products and you can see the yield on them, so that if you invest today, you have a pretty good sense of what you will earn. And the third is Bharat Bond gives liquidity and tax efficiency. It's an ETF/fund. You can buy it and sell it on the exchange, or you can subscribe to it like a mutual fund. And it has the benefit of mutual fund taxation, which is indexation. So it works out to be far more efficient than an FD. I would summarize the Bharat Bond pitch in one line that I really like. It's a product that behaves like a bond, it trades like a stock, and it's diversified like a mutual fund, but it has the cost structure, the lowest cost structure in the world, which is like an ETF.
Sure. So guys, there is one more piece of advice for you. You should be able to explain a product in one line. So, ma'am, we'll move to equity funds, and so there is a lot of buzz around index funds in the market, and they have been offering their products at a very low cost. So do you think that these funds can replace active funds at a very fast stage, or you think that it will be a slow and gradual process?
So I get this active versus passive question a lot, and I run both businesses, right? In fact, because of the passive business is larger, and we've just started our index fund business with MSCI. I actually think this debate, ye jo active versus passive hai, it's a very silly debate, because this is industry terminology. I think products, just to come back to what a line that you said, products should solve a purpose for an investor. A good product is one that solves a purpose for an investor, whether it is active or whether it is passive, doesn't matter. And by the way, I think in a country like India, where bloody equity penetration is so low, the problem is not how to split the pie like this or this. The problem is to expand the pie rather than worrying about dividing it. So that's why I don't like this debate very much. There are great active products out there. There are great passive products out there. There are bad active and passive products out there. So I think you should look at each product on its own merit. There will be categories where passive funds will do well, potentially large cap. We just tied up with MSCI, for instance, to launch a sectoral basket of passives, because we think, at least in sector funds, sectors itself are such an active call that why do you need to further go down the route of being active? And we thought passive funds would bring an edge there, because you can also do international, right? I am not comfortable as an asset manager having my team pick stocks globally outside India today. But if I have an index and if I have a passive approach, then I can just replicate that. So passive has to bring something to the table and it will do well. But I think active and passive can happily coexist. And the debate should be about whether it's a good product and whether it solves your problem. So don't just pick something because it's passive.
Sure, ma'am, noted. So, current scenario where we are seeing the fortunes of market or the market scenario change from gloom to fear or greed. So, what would you suggest people to do when it comes to equity mutual funds?
Okay, so I think given where markets are today, so my big investment, simple one line thing is asset allocation is the most important thing that you can do today. I think it is very boring advice, but it's very relevant advice. And I think 2020 has shown you that basic asset allocation between equity, debt, international markets, and gold, if you just get this right, I think this was the first talk I gave as an MF CEO back in 17, it just solves your purpose because, no asset class performs well at all times. I think there are two approaches to asset allocation. One is that you can do it yourself, or my preferred approach has been to pick asset allocation funds. I think at this point in time, when markets have run up so much, yet there is prevailing uncertainty, my own preferred choice has definitely been the dynamic asset allocation / balanced advantage funds.
Understood. So now we're going to talk about that section of mutual funds which has seen the maximum coverage from 3 years. So, investors in debt funds have seen the worst in past couple of years with defaults. And, a lot of people invest in these mutual funds thinking that they're an alternative to FD. What are the 3 top things that you would check before investing in debt funds as a whole?
Safety 1, safety 2, and liquidity 3. And I said safety twice just to re-emphasize it. I think, and I know there's been a lot of noise about debt. We don't treat it as a business. I would say a few things. One is when you're investing in debt, why are you investing in debt? You're investing in debt for safety. And sometimes, in equity, we understand that large cap or small cap ke beech mein there is a difference in risk. Sometimes in fixed income, we don't understand that between lending to someone at 7% and 9%, there is a significantly different risk grade. If you want to take that risk, I suggest you take it in equities. In fixed income, why do you want to be worried about this? I don't think credit is a retail product, and I think people should stay away from it. So I'm very blunt in my opinion. So I said safety and safety. Second thing I said is liquidity. Mutual funds are liquid. It's important to check the quality of the portfolio and the underlying liquidity because ultimately the mutual fund platform is a liquid platform. If you asked me actually one thing, I would say safety again. And one more point I would make is we are in a low interest rate environment. If nobody likes low interest rates, right? We as Indians, we're used to earning 8-9%. So bada stress hota hai jab 3-4% hota hai. This is the time when you are prone to make the most mistakes. Don't make those mistakes to get that extra 1% right now. If it's a low interest rate environment, sit tight. It's okay.
Understood. So guys, the main takeaway over here is that when you're thinking of debt products, you should think about safety. Don't think of the extra 2-3% and take that risk. Just think about the safety. So, ma'am, the next question we have is on hybrid funds. So, hybrid funds have been also seeing a good interest. So, for whom is this category most suited and what are your thoughts on the same?
So I am a big proponent of hybrid funds. I actually believe the hybrid category, at least certain categories, should be larger than the equity category in itself. And I personally invest about 60-70% of my capital into our own balanced advantage fund. The reason I like hybrid funds is if I think of most of us as investors, what do we want? We want good returns, but we don't want heart attacks. We don't want periods where our capital is wiped 30%. And the basic law of finance is that compounding helps. If you minimize your losses or if you reduce your losses, so if you have 100 rupees and that 100 rupees becomes 80, you lose 20%. To go back to 100, you need to make 25%. But if 100 becomes 50, then you have to double your money to go back. Plus, everyone knows that investors behave much worse when they lose 50% than when they lose 20%. I mean, there's a study by Dalbar that actually says that big losses bring out the worst in human emotions. I think good hybrid funds, especially the dynamic asset allocation category, prevent that behavior of investors. So I think it's a category everybody should look at. It's a great category for SIPs also, by the way. Because as Indians, we want moderate upside with downside protection.
Understood. So I think, guys, we have troubled Radhika ma'am a lot, and it is time for some fun questions. So Radhika ma'am, here are the rules. You have to answer the question immediately. You don't have any time to think. So
Okay.
question number 1: have you ever traveled in a Mumbai local?
No, I haven't.
What up for pizza?
Oh, by far pizza. I grew up in Italy.
Okay, fair enough. Which is your favorite Hindi movie?
Andhi. It's an old movie.
Okay. A name of the fund manager with whom you would invest your personal money outside Edelweiss.
Rajiv Thakkar Parag Parekh. I do.
Okay, great. Whom among your peers you admire the most and why?
I like ICICI for AMC for its innovativeness and the kind of talent they build.
A non-finance book that you would recommend to your viewers to read.
Okay, the recent one I would say it's called Five Paths to Persuasion. Everybody has to sell something in life. This tells you about the 5 different kinds of personality and how you can change your sales pitch for them.
Which book would you recommend to your peers? It can
Which
be a
book?
finance or non-finance both. You would recommend to your peers.
I would recommend this book to everybody. I would
Okay.
actually recommend it because it's about understanding people, and all of us need to understand people.
So, you used to run a restaurant from your dorm at Moran and you used to cook for your friends. So, which was the most appreciated dish that you made?
Chaat, by far.
Okay. If you could have any other profession other than a CEO or fund manager of an AMC, what would it be and why?
Oh, a writer for sure. Or actually 2. Either a writer or a regulator. They're 2 very different. I want to work in government and I love to write. So one of the 2. Maybe writer come regulator.
Okay, amazing. So, Radhika ma'am, we keep seeing a lot of your travel photos and a lot of your cooking pics and a lot of your fitness pics. You go on cycling, you explore new places. So, I think you bring out a very good message that your work-life balance should be balanced. So, what do you have to say on that, and how do you keep a balance between the two?
The simple answer is I don't believe in balance. I believe in harmony.
Okay.
I don't try, and balance is like very stressful. It's like kabhi ye check karo ki main 50% hu ya nahi wo. It's like hybrid fund. Yet that I can do in money management. You should do what makes you happy. Sometimes work takes priority. Sometimes life takes priority. Stay in harmony.
Understood. So, what does a typical day look like, ma'am? Like right from the morning to the night when you log out and go to sleep?
Oh, it's super varied, right? And that's the greatest part of my profession. So on my calendar, you could see a meeting about our digital properties and website, plus a review with fund managers, plus some meeting with my emerging markets team on how sales are working, plus something on an ad campaign, plus 1 or 2 distributor meetings or media interactions. It's very, very varied. The nights, I mean, this is in lockdown, right? The nights otherwise involve some amount of cooking because I like to cook and some amount of reading/writing to end the day.
Understood. So, ma'am, the last question that we have for you is, so, we at Fincademy believe in simplifying the world of finance, stock markets, and, a lot of people are planning to start out in this field. So, our goal is to provide actionable information to our readers. So, what do you advise us to focus the most on?
Well, firstly, you guys are doing very good work and it's very necessary work. I think focus on what the one line you said is making finance simple. And, making finance simple doesn't just mean, so I think there's a lot of Warren Buffett and quotes and global gyan on that. Take Indian examples for an Indian audience and use, and I am a firm believer in the power of storytelling and Indian stories to try and make these concepts much more relatable.
Understood. So I think that's the end for us. Thank you everyone for tuning into this special session. If I had to summarize this session in one line, it would be this: that dream big, don't be afraid, always start with confidence, because we have a live example over here in front of us. Radhika ma'am, who has gone against all the odds and she's here today heading up well-known AMC in India. So thank you guys. Take care. Good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.